Senators on Thursday advanced an $857 billion appropriations measure that includes fall defense funding for fiscal 2019 and raises hope that Congress may be able to avoid a government shutdown or short-term budget extension for Pentagon programs this fall. The measure, which passed 85-7, includes money for the Departments of Defense, Health and Human Services, Labor, and Education. The so-called minibus of appropriations bills was touted by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell as making America stronger overseas and right here at home. Of the total, $675 billion would be set aside for military spending next year, including nearly $68 billion in overseas contingency funds. The levels are in line with recently adopted defense authorization bill and the budget deal reached by Democrats and Republicans last spring. The funds meet many of the requirements of our military commanders, equipping and training units to meet and overcome the most dangerous of emerging global threats, McConnell said before the vote. As ever, we are to provide adequate training, weaponry, skills, so that Americans always prevail on the battlefield. Earlier in the week, McConnell predicted that passing the defense minibus would put us on the pathway to avoid an omnibus or any kind of drama associated with the end of the fiscal year. Lawmakers have until September 30th to either pass new appropriations for federal agencies, pass a temporary budget extension into the fall, or trigger a partial government shutdown. Defense officials have repeatedly warned against either of the latter two, a shutdown, which President Donald Trump has hinted in ongoing fights with Democratic leaders on immigration funding, could force troops to work without pay and shutter a host of military family programs and resources. But Pentagon leaders have also warned that a continuing resolution, which would keep military spending at fiscal 2018 levels for weeks or months, would also be damaging to long-term defense priorities and planning. That's enough. So I'm not going to harp too much outside of the 675 in defense spending, which, keep in mind, this is not the same as the 717 billion. This is another several hundreds of billions. And I want to address fiscal conservatives. These are the people who tell us we can't afford Medicare for all, free college, raising the minimum wage, loads and loads of things. Where are they? Why aren't they protesting this? Where have they disappeared to? Have they been gobbled up by, the donors? I don't understand. Why is no one going after this? But more importantly, you have a military, and I love this idea. Anyone who protests these budgets, this large spending of billions of dollars, is called unpatriotic. They're asked the question of, do you not want a strong military? And you have to understand something. My biggest priority when it comes to how I feel about the military is that the people who are involved, the service members, deserve more than what they get. We're talking about a group that, even with these, $717 billion being, appropriated to defense spending, only received a 2% pay raise. And defenders of that will say, oh, it's the first thing in 9 years, which is true. But it's still very minuscule. And if you apply 2% to anything else, it's below your expectation. If I were your child and I told you that I had a 2% higher grade than last year in whatever course I was struggling with, would you be proud? Would you be impressed? Would you say, wow, that's an accomplishment? So it's really nothing to get excited about. It's something, but it's barely anything at all. I mean, if the alternative to receiving nothing is crumbs, and we're told to just accept it, I don't find that to be anything of any decency. But also, you have to factor in that there are a lot of people who try to frame it that way because they want to be complicit to these large funds being sent to the American regime, the American imperialism. And I've talked about this before. We're bombing 7 countries. We have 900 military bases. We spend more on our defense than the next 7 countries combined, most of which are our allies. It makes no sense that people would be in favor of this other than to feel good about themselves. And look, I understand wanting to believe that if you just throw money at the problem, things will get better. But I've always noted the hypocrisy I've seen with people who will sit here and nod their head in agreement with this policy of throwing money at the problem. when it comes to the military and our enemies across the world, which we've created by being imperialist. But I'd never see the same critiques being levied toward the funding of any social programs. You've never seen someone say, we need to combat the issue of inequality by giving higher, salaries to people who are in the lower and middle class. You never see that. And why is that? Because there is an abundant hypocrisy. There is a desire to use a confirmation bias. You see, when I read that thing about the 717 billion 2 weeks ago, I wanted to know what exactly this would do for everything that it was supposedly being revolved around. And for that reason, I went and looked up the 13 submarines that were going to be built, which I thought were ridiculous. But I wanted to know what all was in this measure, not just, oh my God, large number, I have to get upset about this. And it seems that whenever I talk about this subject with people who call themselves being politically aware, there is one of two reactions. One is to demonize it, which I would rather than the other one, which is to just turn into a bobblehead and give your stamp of approval to a policy that you yourself, did not bother to look into the details of. If that 717 billion had, let's say, 80-90% of it go to giving pay raises of 400% to service members, you join the military and you can get this much, I would have a much harder time being against it, even though you have to remember the military is only populated by less than 1% of the American population. So there was actually a person who tried to say, you're against this and this is going to help the service members. Well, the service members are getting crumbs and it's very few of them in there anyway. So this is just stupid all around. But it's able to go without controversy. No one complains about it. There's this belief that if we just ignore problems, and really you have to understand the other facet of this issue is the fact that we have billions of dollars, that you just heard this right here, that were being appropriated all across these different agencies. And what do most Americans have to say about it? Nothing. And that's not because they're all happy that this is happening. Most of them have no idea it's going on because the media chooses to keep these stories hush-hush. They go out of their way to say, hey, you're upset about the hundreds of billions that are being sent to defense to continue, bombing 7 countries. Shh. It's a continuous game of just insistence on not letting any of this ever get resolved or be changed or different. And you have to understand a lot of the representatives who vote for this in the current era of the oligarchy, where these politicians take money from defense contractors, are only voting for it so they can get more cash. It's a big elitist gangbang and you're not in it. And so you get screwed over by having your tax dollars appropriated to something that we do not know the full scope of. Where is this money coming from? How is it being paid for? Who's benefiting from this, in the actual branch of the military? These are all very significant questions that conservatives, to their credit, will ask in regards to a domestic program. But as soon as it's the military, everyone turns a blind eye. They either ignore that it's going on or they just nod their head in agreement. That's not the right thing to do. The service members are the only people who I would even give this billions of dollars any kind of positive notice for. They deserve a higher raise, much higher than 2%, and most of that money should go to them at the very least. That would actually incentivize people to join, and it really would be an ultimate tribute to a group that has been marginalized as part of a conflict between liberals such as myself, who think that the government overreaches and tries to invade everywhere, and a bunch of empty suit conservative commentators and other people that are just hawks on war that have intended to use this group of people to advance whatever agenda they have. Think about it. If Trump starts a war with Iran with Netanyahu, he's not going to be one of the American soldiers that gets killed, that has to go overseas and fight against some Iranian. If there's some U.S. Israel war against the Palestinians, he's not going to have to worry about getting hit by rocks by the Palestinians. It never occurs to these people that one of my problems with the American government or with the American military is not the people who serve. It is the people who are in positions of power that use the military to advance whatever imperialistic viewpoint they have. It was confirmed that 90%, this is internal resources, that 90% of the drone strikes conducted under Obama's presidency hit the wrong person. I mean, you look at the situation in Yemen where you have 400,000 children left fighting for their lives as a result of starvation during all these drone strikes, blowing up schools and other places of natural resources. And no one bats an eye. We celebrate these presidents and these politicians that are complicit with this. And I don't understand it. You know, the only thing I can really chalk this up to is that the reaction that we should have is not, and I expect this to only get 20 or 30 views, are protests, people going out calling their politicians, asking them, why would you vote for this? Why would you give all this money for the continued use of all these bombs in these different countries? And no one's going to do that because they're not going to know. It's going to be the same thing as with the 717 billion defense bill. It's going to be me and a few other people being upset about it, and then the rest of the population just kind of turning a deaf ear. And these are the kind of policies that we've seen in place for a while now. But when you get hip to it and you see the same people voting against it over and over and over again, because just like the last time it was billions of dollars, you can't just chalk it up to them being some person that's weak on defense. You know, if you want to defend the U.S., how about installing some gun control? We have a mass shooting every day. I don't see any of these conservatives trying to rally against the destruction of everybody from these firearms. I'm not even saying getting rid of them. I'm just mentioning that there are so many domestic terrorists here that are committing crimes against fellow citizens, and you can't get any conservatives to say, let's spend some money on solving that. Let's, have a way of catching these people that's funded and that's directed towards stopping the problem. All you can get is just harsher sentences. A lot of times over victimless crimes like drug offenses. Meanwhile, they continue buffing up the military over and over and over again. And it goes on year after year, president after president. And just as last time, where you had most of both parties approve that measure, it's the same thing here. And then I get criticized for saying both parties are the same. But even in saying that, I can recognize who in particular voted for this. So it's not just me saying, I don't like either party because... No, it's not different to be different. We're talking about an issue that both sides, with the media keeping its mouth shut, happen to agree on. And more often than not, when they agree on something in such a unanimous number, it's not benefiting you. Why do you think Congress has such a low approval rating? Because most of us are privy to the fact that when they give away billions of dollars to the military, they're not giving it away to increase the pay raises and benefits of the honorable men and women who serve. They are using it as a distraction to continue to fund all of these different wars I mentioned earlier, all 7 of them, and to involve themselves in more conflicts. I just told you about the indefinite occupation in Iraq. That's part of this, or that's at least going to be funded by this after it's signed by Trump. Really, just stop, get out of your political ideology and think to yourself, if this was such a good thing that was going to benefit the people, why hasn't the media reported on it? Why haven't you heard a single story from CNN or MSNBC or any of these other, groups that this is a problem? Why is it the same few people voting against it every time? And why do both sides who have a history of being partisan hacks and choosing to only vote, the Supreme Court thing, for example, oh, he's bad if he's on their side, but he's good if he's on my side. Why do they just unanimously get together and say, hey, it's a good idea to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on the military? Again, not to help our service members, but to instead continuously bomb other countries and be involved in every other place on the world. Just read between the lines is all I'm asking. And this isn't an endorsement of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or the Green Party or the Liberty, whatever. It is me saying these are issues that if you just think about, just stop and think about, just ask yourself, why does this person vote this way? Why do they think this is okay? What could this have been used for? You really stop being convinced that these senators are any good. Because you read between the lines. You don't sit there and watch the headline and go, okay, well, I guess it's time to just let that pass. Like I said, if you had, let's say, a fifth of the population of every state showing up at the offices of these senators and voting in mass to get out each one who voted for the $717 billion defense bill and this one, none of them would stay in office. They would be stomped, defeated, crushed. You could even replace them with a member of their own party in the primary. But whatever you did, so long as you just got loads of people to wake up and say, this is wrong. Why am I being ignored so they can, continue buffing up this agency that's not helping anybody? They would all be out. But you don't have that reaction. It's not because everyone's fine with it. Most people don't know about it. And that is purposeful. It's designed to trick and confuse you, and it's being allowed to continue to permeate thanks to us having a corrupt media and corrupt Congress.